Mhm. 9:08 a.m. He is not here, so we will note him as excused. Maybe he had Arthur's out of town. He's in South Carolina unexpectedly, so he wanted to Zoom in, but he's not here. So we'll note him as excused.
Okay, so a second. I think any discussion there was.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good there. The next, Rebecca, maybe you want to.
Sure. So following the village board's conclusion that they accepted the fact that the CDA's recommended that we look at the rental offense strategy, I reached out to a number of our partners that we had enlisted to provide education during the educational series we did on affordable housing, and one of which was Teague Whaley Smith, who is now the executive director for the Community Development Alliance. So just to give you a quick refresher, when we first started our process, the Community Development Alliance was in the process of working their way through identifying their specific goals and mission with regards to affordable housing, using the GARE process. So they were one of our first presentations when we did the affordable housing educational series, and Teague and Gina Still from the Zilber Foundation were the two presenters for that at that time. Since that time, they have finished and identified their specific goals and mission. They have also hired Teague on full-time to be the executive director for their group and organization. Phenomenal choice. And so as we re-engaged on rental offense, it's also a strategy that the Community Development Alliance utilizes within the scope of their work. And Teague had already put together some comparison data with Shorewood's housing analysis in comparison to the city of Milwaukee's housing analysis, and drawn some conclusions. So as we were talking in preparation for identifying some strategies conceptually for this meeting, I had asked for him to come and provide a little bit more detail about his work, where their focus is going. In such case, there's some partnership opportunities from a group who's already doing similar work in this area where we can synergize. So I'm going to turn it over to Teague, and then following Teague's presentation, we're going to come back as a group and then just talk conceptually about some of the strategies that were identified in the memo. Any questions before we begin? Oh, I am Kathy, thank you.
Bart Riepentraub, Planning Development Director for the village, been here approximately 5 years, also the secretary to the CDA. Developer investor.
The CDA. For those of you that don't know, Teague and I went to Banner Boys State together.
Oh.
Juniors in high school. Teague was elected governor of Banner Boys.
Wow.
And I was his attorney.
Funny how those roles played out in your professional.
I moved into the lighthouse.
to share my screen.
When I was doing that, the team really spent the team lines executive for a group called Community Development Alliance. That's what we thought. What really drives me is I'm away from the Kentucky area, the best place to live, particularly for those families that have been left out of the larger economic systems. I live in Sherman Park neighborhood in Milwaukee. I grew up there, Milwaukee Public School graduate and parent. Did affordable housing work for about 10 years and did about $60 million development on the north side of Milwaukee prior to going into public service. So I was the economic development director for Milwaukee County 2020. Providers reached out and said we would like to do one collective affordable housing plan rather than all communities outside of it. So that's what I've been working on. If you want to click through, Rebecca, for the first few. There's some transitions on here, so you can clicking maybe 4 more times there. So everybody recognizes this is why you focus on housing, but I think it's really important to always start with why. So housing and stable housing can improve dropout rates by 30%. That was a study done by about 2 years ago. Housing has a huge impact on all the social determinants of health, including education. You know the work of Matthew Desmond and the eviction work that he's done. He has done some very recent research looking at the physical improvement in housing, a 20% decrease in crime neighborhoods, including homicide rates. And then we always thought that the role, the way to get a stable job and then get into a stable house. Guess that it's actually maybe the other direction. And to a job, you need to be in stable housing. And just an overall impact on health. When we look at stable housing, we go to the next slide.
The dropout rates, elementary, like school
age kids, yeah, school age kids. If they're, and it makes sense, right? You can talk to our county executive in Milwaukee County. And he talks about how difficult it was when you had to move every year because your lease ran out and the rent went up. And you had to move school districts every time. So there's just a huge impact when you provide stable housing. So how do we get there, right? So we strongly feel that we get there through collective action. And I think we generally understand the idea of working together, but there's actually really cool research behind it. There's a recent study done of 25 different communities. 5 of those communities, the success that they had and whatever issue they were addressing could only be described or only be attributed to the collective impact, not larger socioeconomic trends. To give you an example, if you worked on wages in the last few years, you could declare a success because wages have gone up, but it probably doesn't have anything to do with what you're doing locally. But in these 5 communities, there really was an impact based off of collective impact that couldn't otherwise be explained. And what was consistent, they had a backbone support organization to convene partners, and they started with a common agenda. And
I just noticed that President McCaig raised her hand. So let me know at what point you want to pause if you want to take questions now or we.
What would you recommend?
I was just raising my hand because the audio is difficult to hear. Is it
Oh.
possible? Is there a microphone that T could move closer to?
The microphone comes from the sound bar up there.
Are we sure?
Yeah, the audio comes from there. The bar, the microphone in there.
Yeah, Rebecca's really clear, so maybe position makes a difference.
Is this any better?
Do you want to sit here? I welcome it. Here, perfect. Yeah. We're on video.
Okay.
It's just that you don't see it because it's sharing my screen. Oh, yeah.
All right, is that better? All right, I'm getting a big thumbs up from Corey.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
That's always a good sign when Corey gives us the thumbs up. So the other part, in addition to looking at a backbone support organization and common agenda, is that the planning that was done really focused on data, how that can influence resources and other policies and systems. So here in Milwaukee, our common agenda is the collective affordable housing plan, which does look at the larger numbers that it takes to reach racial equity. We have developed a shared measurement system, at least within the city of Milwaukee boundaries, to look at housing on a census tract level. and mutually reinforcing activities, which include some of the research reports we've done. This year, we're also launching an acquisition fund with Axe Housing. A particular problem in some Milwaukee neighborhoods is that they've been targeted by outside investors. And so that gives you an idea of some of the mutually reinforcing activities, and then continuous communication. We have a quarterly meeting that about 100 allies get on just to share data, share strategy, and where we're headed. As an alliance, this is who is on our leadership team. So the Zilber Family Foundation, Greater Milwaukee Foundation, NM, MGIC, several government partners with Milwaukee County, City of Milwaukee, Housing Authority, WIDA, et cetera. And then we also have seats on our executive committee for resident liaisons from both the north and the south side neighborhoods. Our goal in planning is to advance racial equity by providing a quality, affordable home for every Milwaukeean. You can interpret Milwaukeean as broadly as you would like, whether that's city or county. In order to hit racial equity in home ownership, as an example, we need to hit 32,000 new Black and Latino homeowners, which is a big, giant number, but this problem was not created overnight, and it's not going to get solved overnight. We're losing about 1,000 homeowners of color every year in the area, largely to the predatory acquisition that I mentioned, and our goal is to flip that to 1,000 per year. That's on the home ownership side. On the rental side, the number is ironically exactly the same. In the area, there are 54,000 families that are making less than $15 an hour, and there are only 22,000 units of available housing to them. So we have a shortage of about 32,000 units of affordable housing. I've put together some Shorewood numbers to show you what that looks like in your immediate market. When we talk about affordable housing, it's really important to be specific. I've never heard anybody say, hey, I got a great new job and it pays 40% of the area median income, and I found a great apartment and I'm spending 70% of my income on rent. You know, nobody talks like that. And so it's very important to convert things into actual dollars. And so as an example, you know, affordable housing is when a home is available for 30% of a family's income is the benchmark that we use. If it gets above that, you start to lose the ability to pay for transportation to get to a job, food to feed your family, medical care, all those other things. And so that 30% number is really critical. Families like early childhood educators, that's $650 a month on housing expenses. So that would be a gross rent number if the unit included utilities. And we really feel through great policy, we can get a quality affordable home available for everyone. So a couple of examples, just specifically that I think is gonna be relevant to your work. An educator, early childhood educator, healthcare aide, warehouse worker that are making in that $12 an hour range. I know that seems impossible given what wages are, but there are still people making that, a substantial number of people making that. And they could afford a rental home for about $650 a month, or if they were to become a homeowner, you'd have to find a $45,000 home, which of course doesn't exist, right, in this current market. Yeah, yep. For teachers, firefighters, postal carriers that are making $24 an hour, and all these wages come from the national labor statistics for our area as a median wage. So of course, there are people make more or less than that. They could afford $12.50 a month gross rent or a $100,000 home. Yeah.
How does that kind of connect, or maybe it doesn't, and that's not your focus, future focus of housing?
Yeah, I would focus mainly on where do you start? All of these things are interconnected. And I think there's a lot of good research that suggests you start with housing. So when you have the social determinants of health, and there's, 6 social determinants of health, healthcare providing is one of them, neighborhood atmosphere is another. There's all these components, and they're all intersected, and no one has a strategy for all of them together. And so I think you got to decide where you want to start. For us, we want to start with housing based on that recent research. And if you can get people into housing, their healthcare costs actually go down. We have seen this most often in the housing first movement for homelessness. And Milwaukee County did this incredible job of getting people that would otherwise be in emergency rooms and otherwise into housing. And we expect that to be the same for the next segment of the population, which is those families making $15.
Okay. I think there is also
Yeah, and these definitely aren't mutually exclusive, so they all need to be addressed. And then you take that to the next income segment of people making $40 an hour, could afford a $2,500 a month home, or $240,000 home. And again, it's really important to talk specifics, because people will throw out terms like workforce housing and things like that. And I would actually encourage you not to use that terminology when doing your strategy planning. I think for public facing things, it's important that people understand those terms. We work with a group called Frameworks that looks at different language and focus groups language. And it's really that term of available housing that has the most impact on influencing people, is to say right now there's not available housing for people making $15 an hour. Is a very powerful way to sort of state it.
So workforce housing.
I would say it's a disguise. When somebody says workforce housing, I'll give you a dramatic example. I was at a state conference and someone suggested that sometimes the workforce housing problem is a CEO housing problem. And my jaw almost hit the floor, right? Because that's not what I feel the workforce housing issue. That's not the data, says it is. But I guess technically, if some manufacturer is having trouble getting a CEO because they don't have a very large home for that CEO, I guess that could be workforce housing, right? But so that's why it's really important. Nobody says I just got an apartment, it's workforce housing, right? Like we really need to be specific about the dollar amount and the families that you're trying to serve, because it actually has a really big racial equity impact. And so looking at the Milwaukee County area of renters, so people that are not currently homeowners.
Can we pause for one
Yeah.
second, go back? I
Yeah.
just want to circle back to the comments I made at the last meeting that are in the notes. This is what I was getting at. I think we all recognize how far Shorewood is from having any home ownership opportunities at those levels, even the highest one. There just aren't those homes. But those rental ones, we're not that far, which is why we chose the rental strategy.
Yeah.
We're close. So
Is the average.
you can get a 3-bedroom for $1,250.
Home value in Shorewood is what, 340,000.
Yeah, I don't think anything's come on the market under 300. Could have gotten less. My neighbor just sold for $425 for two twos. Yeah, two 2-bedroom units. So that was my point last time, was home ownership in Shorewood is so far that that's why rental. Yeah.
And interestingly, I just had a conversation with some of the brokers associations, and they see those things very much tied. And what they've seen in the larger market is that because there's such a lack of home ownership opportunities, there's a huge rental demand, because people can't afford, people coming into the market, baby boomers holding on to their homes, new people coming into the market, they can't find a home, the rental market gets pushed up. And so
I'm
that's
very
probably
concerned
happening.
right now with inflation, and also all the grandfathered in landlords who haven't, like I've seen rents on my block. Someone just came out at $1,700 for a 2-bedroom, which was the first wave, I think, of all these rents going through the roof, and that 1,250 number no longer being reasonable in Shorewood, which is why I think we need to be focused and actionable soon, because no landlord keeps the rents low just for be a good Samaritan.
It's a very good point. So these numbers have really big racial equity consequences. I think that there's been a lot of focus on $1,000 a month rent units, which is that area that would only serve about 8,000 Black and Latino families. The big number that needs to be resolved for are families that are making $12 to $24 an hour. And that really presents itself in some of the rental demand. We continue to use 2019 census numbers based on talking with some data scientists. 2020 with COVID was a bit of chaos. 2021 numbers aren't out yet. So the numbers are imperfect, but it's the best data that we have. And here's what sort of the rental picture looks like in Milwaukee County. And this is actually similar to a graph that you will see throughout the state of Wisconsin. And where you see there is that the red line indicates the population in Milwaukee County that can afford a certain rent level. So there are families, about 30,000 families, if you start at the left-hand side of that chart, that can afford a unit that's $250 or less. There's another 50,000 families that can afford $250 to $650. There are 90,000 families that can afford up to $1,000. You get the idea. And then through census data, we're able to also look at the number of available units. And you can see that there are not a whole lot of units, close to zero, that are less than 250. There's only 30,000 units that are 250 to 650, and there's two groups competing for that population, right? Both the less than 250 and the 250 to 650 are competing for those, roughly 30,000 units. And then all of a sudden you see this huge spike of units that are available from 1,000 to 1,250. And then what you start to see is at the other end of the graph, you start to see those numbers change again. And that has to do with the dynamic we just talked about. There's not enough home ownership inventory. And so you have people that are making $80,000 a year plus that are being forced into the rental market. And that's why there's this really hot demand for building units of housing that are $2,000 a month or more. So this is Milwaukee County wide. I'll show you a little bit what Shorewood looks like in just a second.
Single people. We're not talking about 2-year-olds just graduating from college or
That's right.
out into a trade job. We're talking about people that need 3 to 4 bedrooms. Generally, right? I mean, we're not talking about studio apartments.
So there has been so much pent up demand that it doesn't matter what you build. There is an overwhelming demand for those 32,000 units. So you could build.
In general, we're talking about mostly when you're talking about this. And family, I don't know how you guys are defining a family, but I'm guessing it's probably a single parent in any case, 2 to 3 kids. Right?
A single income is actually, a very important critical. Everything that you're saying is right. What I would just suggest is that it is very much a policy decision about whether you focus on smaller households or bigger households. The demand is everywhere. And it depends on, the community that you're trying to build. And the general philosophy is to focus on bigger units because you serve more people at a lower cost. If you're building 1 unit for a family of 5, that's a whole lot cheaper than building 5 units for single individuals. So typically that's how many municipalities land on the unit size question. So in Shorewood, your graph looks very similar, a little bit different because you have some of the higher income units. So this is what Shorewood's numbers look like. And again, I think you can expect this whole green thing to kind of shift to the right as rents go up. But you can see that your demand is the same as the rest of the state. It's for units that are $650 a month or less. And we talk about sort of policies and what you might do about that and what CDA's strategy is. There's something called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. LIHTC is what it's short for, and it can subsidize nearly 100% of low income housing. And when they say low income housing, they mean units for families that are making $80,000 a year or less is how they kind of defined it. Right now, 80% of those resources, and we're talking about $150 million a year in the state, 80% of those resources are being spent right in the middle of that graph. I can't do it here, but 80% of those units are being focused on families that are making $15 or more. Only 20% of the resources are being spent where the actual demand is. And people are just starting to see this information because we've never looked at it like this before. So when we talk about collective action and collective impact, that's one thing that we can do together is say, WHEDA, the Wisconsin Housing Economic Development Authority, you need to change your policies to have 100% of the resources be focused where 100% of the demand is. And so your board president independently, as an example, wrote a letter to WHEDA. We had about 50 people respond and say, we need to change this. So that's something that we're working on, and we'd love more partners to do that. that doesn't solve your immediate issue, right?
That 100 million, how is that? You know, is that something the president keeps sending a letter, but like, how could we tap into that resource to kind of further the pot that we have?
Yeah, and I think the answer is you should, because right now, the way it's structured, developments in suburbs score very, very well. For example, they have a points category for the success of the school district and the income of the area and those type of things. So the technical answer to your question is that there's something called a qualified allocation plan. That is the strategy of the state in allocating that $150 million a year. That gets changed every 2 years. We're right in the cusp of making changes in that. The state has the opportunity, but who has access to that is developers. And so developers apply for those tax credits. It's crazy competitive because again, it can finance almost 100% of the units in some circumstances. I think you should look at it more like a 60% subsidy. And then that way, you know, you guys could focus on finishing the rest of the 30% subsidy or whatever necessary, rather than filling the entire gap yourself. So those tax credit applications are due every year, and they are submitted essentially on January 1st of each year. And the typical philosophy is it takes about a year to put in an application, a year to close the transaction, and a year to build. So it's kind of like a 3-year proposition, which you'll see later in the presentation. There's lots of sort of criteria that you guys have to juggle. One of which is, when does your, you know, TIF money expire? When does your ARPA money expire from the county? And how do you match that with leveraging and all of those kind of things? A year to close the financial transaction. You're absolutely correct. The issue that you have is available land. And so that would be a strategy that you could pursue, is using your TIF dollars to acquire land so that there's some place that somebody could actually build.
Because it's only for new construction rather than renovating existing apartments?
You can use it for rehab. What you can't use it for is rental assistance. You can only use it for the upfront construction.
Because we have certainly existing units that could be rehabbed. That could,
And potentially converted, right? I think that's something that you have to think through, is that
Rehab usually entails increasing rents. I think that's.
but not if you
Probably
get the tax credit.
yeah, sure.
Let me propose an actual example, because I think this one's right. What about all those buildings on Wilson Drive? How, because I see that as a huge low hanging fruit for us. Like, whoever owns those is going to raise all those rents. And we have right now, I forget what they're called, but people who could afford more, but are in those units.
Yeah.
But they're still affordable units because of the rents. Those rents are ripe to be all raised. And if we're going to be on offense, I think we need to be ahead of that and work with that owner, or become that owner, or work with someone to become that owner, because that's a lot of units and that would be meaningful impact. So is there a way that this would work in a situation like that? Not necessarily rehabbing them, but kind of taking control of ownership or something with an alliance?
So there's
To hold those rents where they are.
Yeah, there's two answers to that question. So one is affordable housing tax credits can be used for the purchase and rehab of units. And so if, let's say, for example, it would cost you $10 million to buy the units that you're talking about. You take that $10 million, if you're successful in getting tax credits, it's a 9% tax credit. So you get $900,000 for that $10 million property, but you get that tax credit every year for 10 years. So the developer. So you get, right, because you have $9 million of tax credits to build a $10 million building, but you can't pay your general contractor in tax credits. So you convert that to cash and you sell it, you know, for 90 cents on the dollar. So now you have roughly $8 million to build a $10 million facility. You guys could come in with your $2 million of TID funds to fill, you know, the rest of that gap. And now you have $10 million for both the acquisition and rehab of the acquisition that you've
So
purchased.
there's parameters on how much of it has to be acquisition and how much has to be rehab, or is it slide around?
It slides around. I mean, I think,
Mostly acquisition and some of them.
yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of tax credit developers that could help you through that. That would be better than I, on some of those intricacies. The other thing that you could do is that, what you're referring to is largely a preservation strategy. You have some affordable units. And so what a lot of governments will do is they'll enter into housing assistance contracts, which is you actually don't take acquisition. You just say, keep your rents where they are, and we will pay you the difference, right, on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
And maybe you could pay that contract up front. So if you have $2 million, we're going to give you a $2 million contract, and you need to keep these units affordable for the next 20 years. So so this is a big issue that you guys. It's very much like rent control is a regulation. This is a contracted rent control.
I would like to point out, I did live in a rent controlled building in New York. I was not one of the rent controllers, but it's one of the only successful things I've ever seen. People lived in that building for 50 years, paid a third of what I paid. It was well mixed between incomes and races and classes. It was, the whole neighborhood was a success. It didn't gentrify overnight. There were people, it took 30 years to turn buildings, and it really kept it like the goal of what we're trying to achieve. It seemed like it was being achieved there.
So
You were saying the difference between rent control and you're saying this is a contract.
yeah, rent control is just a regulation. You can't, and the state would preempt you. Right, the state, if you guys said, landlords, you have to keep your rent where you are, probably already prohibited by state statute, it would take approximately 5 seconds for the state to come in.
From whoever owns that building.
Yeah, and you pay them for that, right? That would be the idea. And in your example, you could pay them for 30% of units, right? If your goal was to economically integrate at the building level rather than at the community level, you could buy a portion of those units.
And so how is, just trying to,
Mhm.
what you're proposing is.
Yeah.
You would say, here, from our $2 million, with the pay rent, the difference if you're gonna rate X number of units, here's the time into this.
Correct.
That's
Yeah.
it.
And that is exactly, I think, what's happening at the Light Horse. That is the way that was set up as tax credits. He set aside, I don't know, 8 or 10 of the 80 units that are totally, the rent is totally different. And they rent it, right, and the tenants are chosen based on their income. Yeah.
But to qualify, it has to be.
Right.
Right.
And so who does,
And get a mix.
who does the work and where's the transparency and accountability?
That's the first we need an
Yeah.
11.
So like, if I wanted to know, I mean, people are privacy, but if I wanted to know how many people in the Light Horse are getting the subsidy, but if I wanted to, money was being well spent, could they let me know there's resident number 47, they make this much, is that?
Yeah, the way, yeah, so
available?
there's an entire industry around affordable housing. And one of the issues that you guys have is that you're a smaller community. And so larger communities have a public housing authority. And so a public housing authority would have staff, and they would get every year income certifications from whoever they have the contract with. Those income certifications, you can identify individuals, so those wouldn't be public, but there's typically a sort of a rent roll that indicates that. And then, of course, the contract itself would be a public document as well. And so I think whenever strategy you pursue, you need to figure out your economy of scale issue. And you can do that potentially by partnering with an existing housing authority, either the county housing authority or the city housing.
And that's all legal.
Yeah, they can provide those tenants. I
So they would
believe,
just
too.
provide, they would take the cut.
Yeah, you'd enter into a service agreement, right? Like, I think it would be easier probably for a service agreement with the county because you guys are in the county I don't know the dynamics of whether a city housing authority could contract with the suburb, but both would be worthwhile conversations. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, again, this is a well-established industry with practices. The two things that you guys don't have is you don't have a housing authority and you don't have a redevelopment authority. And that's
You're
would be,
looking at that.
yeah, yeah. So what you don't have you're not doing acquisition for the redevelopment authority, right? You haven't set up that to do
So
that.
the problem is, it's not a problem, it's just a reality. We're gonna lose some of our $2 million. You know, we just.
Either paying it to ourselves or to someone else.
How would you know, at what point do we say our staff has already done this much?
Yeah,
Weeks ago.
Yeah.
yeah. You have a
You would pay
lot
those
of
staff
criteria
here
to
if they were
juggle.
here. So if we just have service agreement, we're just paying it. There's outsourcing
There-
it.
There was a question online. Corey, did you still have a question?
I just wanted to clarify that the city of Milwaukee, Housing Authority, the rent assistance program does cover the all of Milwaukee County. And I don't know that a specific agreement would need to occur.
Yeah,
So Corey has told me she has people ready to move into these places. So if we can get this sort of agreement with
I
the
don't know, would
owner
an
or something.
agreement be in the best interest of the residents?
Yeah.
Why would we not want an agreement?
Yeah, and help me out, Corey, if this is not your point. So there are existing resources that are spent on vouchers. So- Yeah, so for example, there's something called participating jurisdictions. And so there's two participating jurisdictions. One is the city of Milwaukee, one is Milwaukee County. And they get rental assistance from the federal government and they have to spend it, according to those rules. And then the city of Milwaukee, to resolve the housing crisis for homelessness, they actually spend tax levy on vouchers. It's not money they get from the feds. You're talking about bringing in a new resource, which is TID dollars, to pay potentially for vouchers. And so I think you'd have to talk with your city attorney, right? I think that those are things that you'd have to walk through.
Nobody else has done this.
And not to my knowledge, no.
So yeah, I think our whole point is that we want to implement those strategies that are being used successfully elsewhere, but we recognize the gap in affordability here.
Yep.
Our TID is going to bridge that gap. So
yeah,
you tell us how to do that.
Well, I have some options for you. I'll get to those just a second here.
Right.
So I just want to emphasize how big of a racial equity question this is. Because if you look at your population on Shorewood and you look at the population of families that are on this side of the graph, you have about 33% people of color. If you were to focus on strategy in the middle of this graph, you have 5% people of color. And you have, at this end of the spectrum, 10% people of color. And so just understand that there are really huge racial equity consequences depending on your strategy. If you decide to fund units that are $1,000 a month, that means that it's going to have essentially a 95% impact on white Shorewoodians, if that's the word, and 5% of people of color. If you focus on 650 or less, that's the highest percentage that you have of people of color.
And what percentage of our units are? Yeah, or less, yeah.
Yeah, so the green line represents the units of housing that you have available. So currently you have about 400 units of housing that are 650 or less, and 250, you have about maybe 50 units that are less than 250.
Are those all on the high rise then?
This is all through census data.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So the majority is.
Light horse plus whatever that down by the baseball field.
River Park.
River Park, yeah.
But if you take out River Park, because we have no control over River Park, that's left.
This is all the strategies that you guys have to think through, right?
Light horse has 17 units, I think, and then all the rest.
River Park, so
Yeah.
we have nothing.
Yeah, these
Well,
units
yeah,
are all
but-
occupied, right? Like these units are all occupied. My guess is that if anybody's charging 650 or less, it's already subsidized housing that has income limits.
Right.
Right. But you have this really incredible opportunity of all these units that are, between 1,000 and 1,250 that you could buy those units down. It would be a potential strategy.
Yeah.
It's about $5,000 a year, right? Because you'd be paying $400 a month to the landlord to cover that gap in rent. That's $4,800 a year.
And what this is, if we do that, much better chance of helping families smaller.
Correct. Right. Yeah, if you're going to buy down units from, from 1,500 to 1,000, 95% of that population is white. If you're going to buy down units from $1,000 to 650, 40% of that population are people of color.
Okay.
So you can, in fact, in using low-income housing tax credits, you cannot use it at student housing. It's one of the requirements of the federal program. So those are the type of restrictions that you can build in. Correct. Student is not a protected class when it comes to subsidized housing. Here's what your number looks like on the available affordable housing is that you have a gap of 432 units that are less than 650. That represents, I have this later in the presentation, that represents about 8% of your units. So as an example, if you were to have a new unit strategy, you would have to grow the overall units in Shorewood by about 8% if you had a new unit strategy.
That's about,
You have to grow the population of Shorewood by 8%.
400 plus units.
And they'd all have to be affordable, is the point I tried to make at the last meeting too. And nobody wants all affordable housing. They want them integrated into the fabric kind of.
It's a really interesting policy question about whether you should integrate affordable housing at the building level, sort of the block level, or the community level. And there's lots of different research that suggests that you can do it at somewhere between that community level and neighborhood level, that you don't necessarily do it at the building level. Yeah, so here as an example is you have Oakland Avenue, right? Your highest density area of the city. So do you have a strategy that says every building that goes up on Shorewood should have 20% affordable housing, right? That would be integrating at the building level. Integrating at sort of the neighborhood level would say that we don't need to do it on a per building basis, but 20% of the overall housing that's developed on Oakland Avenue, we want that to be affordable. And so what would happen there is to say, look, these new buildings are really high finishes, really expensive units. Let's do this at the building level. And it's okay if we have one building that has, affordable units, because now that's spread out over a neighborhood. A community. Right.
But we're subsidizing. Everybody's agreeing?
No.
I mean, the answer to your question is yes, if you want to subsidize it. Yeah. If you're gonna build, here's a way to think about it. Yeah.
And we would say to them, okay, you can put granite in this building, but in this one, you have to put because we're subsidizing.
So here's the best way to think about it is in dollars. It's going to cost to build your average 1,000 square foot market rate unit in Shorewood is going to cost you about $300,000. Okay.
For one unit.
One unit in a building will cost you about $300,000. And if you look at what kind of mortgage somebody that you could pay off at $650 rent, your operating costs are going to be at $650 a month. And so the answer to how much you can borrow to pay that $300,000 is functionally zero. And so the question is do you want to subsidize a unit at $300,000 per unit in order to have everybody have comparable units? Or do you want to bring down the cost of that unit by building a smaller, more average unit, right? And now it's only going to cost you $200,000 to build it. So you're only subsidizing 200 versus 300.
So what happens?
They're all the same.
Why couldn't we do that?
You could, if you followed their model, which was to use low-income housing tax credits. For you to come in and say, we're going to replace low-income housing tax credits would be your most expensive strategy. You could say, I would guess that low-income housing tax credit project, again, because of the WIDA regulations, that 80% of those units aren't meeting your demand. 80% of those units are at $1,000. Correct.
And you have to remember too, why that's what every day is it is really expensive to build anything. And I'm not just talking about the fact that this isn't true. When you look at building code, regulations, a lot of stuff you have to do, that personally, I think a lot of it is kind of not necessary. That is what drives the cost up. It's not granite, it's not tile floors, it's the fact that you have to have over the top safety and health. And
That
other
is
things,
really true.
which is really, you know, where we run into this. Everything from the cost of construction, right? So the fact that you have to, how you're building the building, yes. So, everything from materials to, you have to plan for the worst case ever, you know, Armageddon, when the building gets hit by whatever, even though we may never have a tornado in the village of Shorewood ever. You know, we can still have to build to the
Hurricane time.
Yeah. And right,
all these things. And one way to just kind of illustrate this, I was looking at this the other day. I own buildings. I own a total of 4 unit buildings. I bought them for a certain amount 7 years ago. But when you look at my insurance house, my insurance company says it will cost to rebuild those 2 buildings 40% more than what I paid for them 5 years ago. So you buy a lot more than you can build. Right?
Yes.
Because you can buy. And the reason why is buildings were built at a time when they weren't.
Right.
They weren't quite there. So, you know, like these 40 buildings, they don't have two stairwells. They're only 40. They don't really need. They have area porches, they're called jump porches. But now you try to build a building, you have to have 2 stairwells.
So
To extrapolate one point further, also to your granite point. I think it's been a part of a lot of discussions. People complain about new 4-story developments. They all look the same. They're all ugly. They have they're not beautiful from the outside. Well, the reason they're built that way is partially to be affordable. If you built them any other way, I mean, and everyone would complain if you built something to $100 a square foot or $200 a square foot, even. It would be a pull shed. I mean, to even build the most basic building is extremely expensive.
So I agree with everything that's been said. There's not a lot that you can do about some of the state and federal regulations, but it's actually 3 things that you guys are doing right now that are having the exact same impact. I think you're aware of these, but just to go through them, one is the design requirements of what you're requiring for glazing and things like that, which again, there's a community reason for that. Your biggest one is actually density. So for example, if you had a market rate development that was being built and it can support a 4-story development, it, you know, basically space above that is functionally free, right? Because you already have the land costs, you already have the elevator, et cetera. And so you're really spending a lot of your most valuable resource on density, on sort of design requirements and market housing rather than affordable. Parking and requiring on-site parking is a huge one. Imagine, again, you have that 4-story building, one of the floors is dedicated to parking. What if that 1 story was dedicated to affordable housing? So those are 3 areas that I think you might want to look at internally about how you're driving the cost of building affordable units.
So not requiring.
Correct. Yep.
Especially for that.
Right.
That's even more.
Yep.
But you can parking. It would be cheap.
Right. And the opportunity costs that you're, you know, paying for cars instead of affordable housing. So 3 strategy questions I would ask you guys to consider while you're doing this is, what is your goal for the available units? And so, for example, you could set a goal of, we want to hit the 432 units at $650 a month or less, and we want it to be a mix of 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or 3 bedroom. If you don't do that, everybody will just build 1 bedroom or studios, right? So you got to figure out what is your goal. You have to figure out where will these units be located. I actually think this is your biggest challenge because you're a built-out community. So if I were to start, you have to start with a goal to know where you're focused. But you really got to focus on, where do you want these? Do you want these to be a combination of new units and buying down existing units? What is sort of your growth tolerance? If you have a strategy, this is all going to be new units. Do you have the political will to grow Shorewood by 7.7%? And then how? Which criteria will you use to pick the tactics that you guys are planning on working on? And so what I want to leave you guys with is, when we have these very complex situations, and you guys have all identified nearly every criteria I'm going to show you, is that you need to come up with some kind of decision matrix and think about how you're going to evaluate these strategies. So for example, strategies for new units, we've talked about a bunch. You can integrate these into each new residential building. You can acquire strategic land for redevelopment. You can build it yourself. A lot of communities are just like, the market's not going to serve this. There are entire countries that acknowledge that the market will never serve this market. That's, unfortunately, the term that people use for this is public housing, which has had a very negative connotation. But when the market's not doing something, the government may need to step in. Strategies for conversion of existing units, individual vouchers for tenants. So you talked about entering into a contract with the building. Sometimes the voucher follows the tenant. That's the way most Section 8 vouchers work. I don't think it's a really viable strategy here for a couple of reasons, largely timing, but it's something that to just put on the table. Contracted units of existing housing we talked about, and then acquiring units yourself, which we also talked about. So here's what a decision matrix might look like. And this is just for illustrative purposes. But one way is to say, what are our goals and criteria? Are we trying to address racial equity? Are we trying to leverage other funds to maximize the use of funds? Are we trying to make sure that the unit itself is cost effective? Are we trying to have an impact on density one way or the other? Can this fit sort of the 1 to 3 year opportunity that you have? Or to map out, what TIDs are closing to see what the whole income stream is. And then implementation risk, which it includes, can you find a partner to help you with this? Or what is the administrative cost? So this gets into some really healthy arguments about, well, hey, I actually think that building it ourselves is leveraging other funds, right? So that should be a green. And it's a way to kind of move away from my values trump your values, because sometimes people really care about the leveraging aspect, and sometimes people really care about the administrative cost. And you just need to get a consensus of what are all of the criteria we're going to use. And then this kind of model can actually even be used once you identify a strategy and say, hey, we're focused on a new building strategy. Well, there's lots of different things that you could do on a new build strategy. You could subsidize construction, without a density bonus and without tax credits, and at $1,000 of rent. Wouldn't have a very big racial equity impact. In fact, it probably would further the gap. Not doing any leverages, not very costly unit, but it's a 1 to 3 year opportunity, and you may have a project partner identified. Whereas construction of a 650, you have a racial equity impact, but you have, timing concerns because you might not have a partner, you have to do land assembly, et cetera. And you can start to see, which areas, if we share these values sort of equally, which areas have kind of the most green and yellow, which kind of gets you to a potential solution. So it's happy to stay as long as you want. I don't have, any hard stop here. Just to kind of bring this part to a close is that as far as our relationship with the CDA, the first step is really just to plug in. So if you're not already subscribed at housingplan.org, that gets on our email list for events and other data and other grant opportunities that we become aware of, including national grant opportunities. We are partnering with Milwaukee County as an example to work with them on the RFPs for their county ARPA dollars for affordable housing. And so those kind of opportunities will be through there. If you have an idea on this overall issue, please drop us a line and let us know. And also just get going. You know, we're not a bureaucratic organization. You certainly don't need the green light from us to do anything. We're here just to support whatever you might want to work on.
What is the most important of this process? And I think we somewhat done some of that, but I feel what areas are good for us would be it would be hard for us to this all, but also would be really but this is for illustrative purposes, but, you know, if we could borrow and use.
Rebecca, I'm going to switch seats with you. So
Okay.
you are now in control. I'm happy to stay. It looks like Corey has a question.
Great.
And by the way, I agree with that point. This is very helpful. I mean, yellow, green, yellow, and red.
Mhm.
You know, this can almost drive the
Yeah. So for example, then the construction subsidy is mostly green. The density impact yellow and then the two red. So one could infer then that our ideas, that's the best way to go.
I would just add to that, if integration into new buildings is your strategy, so if you go back up one slide, I would start even higher. The downside of that is.
Oh, you know what?
The two right now. we
I
have
stopped the
two
stream.
new buildings going up, right? That's what I'm saying.
I tried to plug back on those and
No,
just
I
told
know,
them, no.
We don't control.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's a market in Shorewood. We have two buildings going up right now, apartments.
Right, we have asked, the board a while ago, asked us to communicate with Three Leaf and ask them to consider affordable housing. My understanding is that they're still considering affordable housing. And I do know that they both had conflicting appointments this morning, but that they'll be likely watching our meeting following this.
I guess I'm not specific. I mean, maybe.
Well, that's something we should be encouraging, and I personally believe. that
Yeah.
we need to be a lot more help. This is good. I think this one- Density is just- moving forward, all in sense. Yeah, we have two now, we should probably have 5 more in the pipeline. One of these sites around our community that are woefully underused. One story, hardly used buildings on them, you know? So I think it's a combination of things, but when you look at that 1 to 3 year opportunity, I think that's, if I look back what we've been talking about over the last year and a half, I think everyone would agree, we want to do something that has an impact in the near future. And that's 1 to 3 years. Yeah, it's not 6 months, but it's not 5 years, right? It's 1 to 3 years. Do something, especially with rents about to probably go up, if they aren't already up. And, you know, to me, it does seem like we should be pursuing a lot of things, and I think these discussions are going to lead to more good things when it comes to affordable housing. I think this is just a for us. I mean, Shorewood has never really discussed this, so we have done a lot to educate ourselves, the community, and get to the point where we can start making a decision about how to use this $2 million that we have. And I really like the idea of trying to identify something that we can do now, but also keep the conversation going that, yeah, let's get more development going here, and let's put a recommendation in place that we would like to see in the 20% of units that are built.
a possibility that we can get that done. And if we can get developers like Three Leaf on board right now, that's even better. Like, that would be great. But I'd rather see that development not get delayed because have them walk or worse, you know, just because they have to wait for us to get our stuff figured out. So I know we were gonna try and have some sort of consensus.
Yeah, I think Mike had a statement, but Corey also online has a
Yeah.
statement, or I don't know what she has to say, so I don't know how you want to facilitate that, but Corey, can you hear us better?
I can hear you, and when Teague was near you, I could hear him, but I'm having problems hearing everything else. So whatever I say may completely lack context of what you're all saying.
Okay.
You want me to go ahead?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to first thank Teague because I think I've known Teague for like 20 years, and every time I hear him speak, I come away a little bit smarter. I want to speak to the individual vouchers, and this matrix is a great tool. So that my expertise at the moment is around the housing choice voucher as a means of achieving integration and alleviating racial disparities. So in general, federally, the goal of the housing choice voucher, or what's referred to as individual vouchers here, was designed as an alternative to public housing. It was supposed to ensure that families have access to neighborhoods. Public housing was very concentrated in poor neighborhoods. So the voucher was designed to ensure that families would have access to good neighborhoods in private market housing with, you know, parks, green space, good schools, things like that. And that goal just has not been realized throughout the country and in Milwaukee. And specifically in Metro Milwaukee, vouchers are more segregated in high minority neighborhoods. That's the definition than any other metro area in the country. And so what that means is kids are not having access to those schools, that green space, those kinds of things. The Housing Authority, City of Milwaukee right now has the potential to house 7,000 families with vouchers, but they're only using 6,000. Not because they can't afford it, but because there are not enough landlords who are taking vouchers. You know, in terms of race and equity, about 90% of those voucher families are families of color. Housing Authority City of Milwaukee has jurisdiction in Shorewood. They can use their vouchers throughout Milwaukee County except West Allis. So basically, all of your landlords right now that have private market housing could be filling these units that would be paid for by the Housing Authority. They wouldn't have to be paid for out of your TIP funds. Your role would be just to incentivize however many landlords you want to incentivize to take these vouchers. And additionally, I let Rebecca know this a couple of weeks ago. The Housing Authority City of Milwaukee used to have a payment standard for a 3-bedroom unit that was about $1,400. They are moving to adopt what's called small area fair market rents in 53211 right now. That would take that 3-bedroom rent up to $1,872. So that I think that would make much more reasonable for landlords to be able to take those units. So and then looking at on this matrix where it talks about the high administrative cost, I don't think that's true. I think the Housing Authority City of Milwaukee would do all of the certification. They would do the income verifications. They would do background checks. They would do all that. You would just need to manage that landlord incentive, or we could, you know, figure out some way to manage that would be fairly low administrative costs. So I just want to put that out there and clarify, because vouchers are an area that I'm working pretty closely in right now, and Shorewood would be really a lovely community for these families to be able to access, particularly those with kids, because your schools are so good. All right, that's what I had to say.
So Corey, I don't know if you can hear me, but can you talk a little bit about that gap
between the 6,000 and 7,000 landlords.
Call the top up.
Can you provide any context as to why you think or why it is that landlords are not participating with the vouchers? And what's the process for landlords to participate in the vouchers?
So, based on what I know, the Apartment Association of Southeast Wisconsin did a survey of their members, mostly, landlords, housing providers, about the voucher program. In some ways, there's an inspection process to get your unit certified. It's not anything crazy. It's a fairly easy, like health and safety kind of inspection process. Sometimes there's a delay in when a tenant qualifies for a unit and when they get the first payment. So that could be like if Shorewood decided they wanted to get in the landlord incentivizing business, maybe you would make that bridge payment, between the inspection getting done and that first payment being made. Maybe that would be something Shorewood would work on, or security deposit incentives. Some landlords, and some of the reasons for them not wanting to rent, some are, very valid, and some are just misinformation around who they think people with rent assistance are. Some people think they're going to be more likely to damage a unit, which isn't true statistically at all, because families that damage a unit are likely to lose their voucher, and that's a lot to lose versus families that don't have a voucher. So, some communities have been known to do what they call risk mitigation funds to make sure landlords are comfortable that if there is some sort of loss, if there were damage, that it would be paid for. But that's most of the communities that do that never end up accessing it, because it's not a real thing. Those families generally are not ones to damage units. Yeah. So other reasons landlords don't like the voucher program. Sometimes there's just a sense of, I don't want to be forced to, sign into a contract with the government. There's been that, but I think I covered the primary reasons. Oh, and then the rents aren't high enough. So like if I have a 3-bedroom I want to charge $2,200 for, but the payment standard is only $1,500, then but that's a very legitimate issue. But with these new payment standards, I think that they are really much more competitive and much more likely that somebody could find a place in Shorewood.
I agree with everything that Corey has said. In the earlier example, it was if you were going to use your own TID funds to support individual vouchers. So I think it's a great strategy that you should explore. Just so people are aware, there is competition for vouchers, right? So I wouldn't go into this thinking that, it's just 1,000 vouchers that nobody's using. Vouchers are very competitive. Vouchers can be used to some extent for home ownership. It's a large, yeah, so it's also a large way that the county, as an example, has done supportive housing. And so it sounds like Corey has some info that I may not have, but vouchers are a very valuable resource. So definitely I would explore the strategy, but there are other people working on voucher strategies as well.
Corey, can you hear us better now?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Thank you. I was just going to say that I think, Teague, you're referring to project-based vouchers, which are competitive. The tenant-based vouchers are not. They are just an agreement between a private landlord, the housing authority, and a tenant.
If I can just add to that, because Corey and I talked offline a couple months ago, she said basically, we can find the units, she can fill them. We can find landlords who are willing to do that. Yeah, we have a lot of duplexes, and we can, if we went out with a program to those landlords and said, we have people, that might be landlords that sign up because they believe it's the right thing. More than likely, landlords are the worst type of person.
And so the Milwaukee Housing Authority would do this for us.
Corey said they will screen the applicants, they will provide us the applicants, they will give us the families, we give them a place to put these people.
For a cost, obviously. We pay you something, right?
No, we top up, we pay the landlord the difference, and whatever the landlord is, whatever the market says, what the landlord says, $2,000 for a 3-bedroom, they would pay $1,800. We would kick in $200 from our funds, And then if that's maybe $100 more than the landlord would get, then as a landlord, maybe that's the incentive they needed to make that leap of faith or whatever.
So when we look at the topping on, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna kind of comment to that when I was on the board, that was definitely something that we heard from the smaller landlords of duplexes and quad units that more around taxes. And so if we could sort of keep them whole, I think that would be a benefit to both the landlord who is feeling the pinch of higher property taxes and also be a service
I had thought
to lower income housing options.
I was thinking of if they would enroll in a program to bring those types of people in, that there would also be a tax freeze, but that's so far outside our scope and our ability
Right.
to do that. that
Right.
We don't have the mandate, but essentially accomplishing the same thing.
But I mean, I think that could help, especially
Especially if they're
smaller.
older landlords, they
Right.
want to know the consistency of taxes are
Yes.
gonna go through and say, we will in effect cap your taxes by making that difference and making these rent, so basically a longer term lease with them.
Well, that was also what I was gonna ask is, do you have the ability to then say, if you have the voucher that they're signing a, I don't know, 3-year lease versus a 1-year lease? Is that within the purview or no?
That's a core question.
I can respond to that. The housing authority just does 1-year leases. You could ask the landlord to continually rent to somebody with a voucher, but I don't think the housing authority will do longer than 1 year.
Yeah, and
Okay.
part of the reason for that, I have a little insight into that, is residential leases in the state of Wisconsin are 12 months or less.
Hmm.
If you do 366 days or more, that kicks you into the commercial lease code in the state of Wisconsin, which is a whole another ball of
Brains
wax.
over here.
I only know I only know that because a number of years ago, my real estate attorney who does my leases and other things basically told me that you have to, as a landlord, you want to quote unquote be careful doing 2-year leases because your protections as a landlord are different in those scenarios because it kicks you into commercial. So your eviction procedure is different, your everything is different from a legal perspective in the state of Wisconsin. So just something for
Thanks
people
for
to know.
that. Good to know. So legally, though, we cannot say to one group of taxpayers, I mean, it wouldn't be, we'd be doing the subsidy because we're not going to say to one group of property taxpayers, we are going to not increase your taxes, right? I mean,
We don't have any.
we can't do that.
No.
So it would totally be the subsidy. And you can't say, if you accept the subsidy for 3 years, we won't raise your taxes for 3 years. We're not gonna do that. We can't do that, right?
We can't.
I
State
guess-
uniformity
Class.
Okay.
I'm sure there's some sort of, well, no, because they're signing the lease with them.
I guess the one thing about working with the existing housing too is, density all sounds great, but I think you have to look at it from a, standpoint of what all comes with the density. We were a streetcar community, right? We were built around a streetcar, and then the streetcar went away, and we're still struggling with that. And so what do? You can't just increase it, just hope that if you build it, it will come. It's the parking and the traffic that is the biggest rub, I think, for people when you go to increase the density. And if anybody's got ideas about that, besides everybody's going to be on a bicycle, that's what I need to
Parking
hear.
and
That's what I
traffic
need to hear.
increases.
If we go with the
Yeah.
density, how do we solve the traffic and parking problems? Because we're already. we
You're
just got-
assuming that there is a problem.
Well, we got a letter from a woman in the last week. She's livid about our parking,
Every one of those is 100 that don't care.
What
Yeah.
have we done? Her parking,
That's right.
It's
And-
more
and
annoying to
that-
me that I can't park on the street at night, and if I forget my car out there because I have to juggle my cars, I get a ticket. Than if someone was parking in front of my house every day. I mean, there's many of me. I know John voted to have parking restrictions. Lessons, right, when you were gonna be impacted
Oh, yeah.
around the corner from your house?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
it's part of the
Something,
equation that you
yeah.
have to think of.
Yeah.
I mean, as an elected official, it's something I can't just say, yeah, let's go density. I love it. I love my bicycle. How are we going to deal with the traffic and the parking that density would bring? Because let's face it, people have to go where the jobs are, and the jobs are not, they're not, they're at places in Mequon and they're not near here and our bus system won't support. We have to fight to keep our bus system here. I mean, that was the last fight we had with the county, was trying to maintain service on Wilson Drive.
So just quickly, these strategies, of course, are not mutually exclusive. You can work on all these at once. I think Corey brings a really excellent strategy to the table. The fact that it's not naturally occurring right now, I think is a root cause that you should explore. And is it just an informational issue with landlords? Or is it a real issue, meaning you don't have landlords that are willing to do it? And just again, you bring in a secondary strategy of, do you guys acquire the units so that they're, you are the willing landlord, and or do you work with a nonprofit to acquire those units so you have a willing landlord? Is something you should
As
consider.
I've sifted and winnowed through everything, that seemed to be like, do you know of a nonprofit that we could potentially seek out that to partner with? Because that would take the burden of all the oversight infrastructure off of us somewhat, and we can just leverage the money, because that's what we have is money.
Yeah, we have to have some conversations. I mean, I think, at CBA, we believe in radical candor. And so the radical candor for you all is that housing is very expensive in Shorewood. And so the policy decisions that we struggle with as a coalition, is it worth the overall financial resources to have one person staying in rental in Shorewood versus two homeowners in Milwaukee, right? That's a really hard policy question. But the fact that you are using your own money, I think, changes that equation. But I think a lot of the doers, right, the Habitats for Humanities, all those other folks, they fall on that two homeowners in Milwaukee side of the equation. And so it's why you don't have nonprofits operating in this area, but absolutely, right? And you talked a little bit about the property tax side of things. I think we're all aware of the uniformity clause. But if this is owned by a nonprofit or a public housing authority, there are some things that you can do, creatively, in that arena. So just some additional considerations.
One thing I would say, kind of thinking through kind of all of this and coming at this relatively new, this is my second meeting on the CDA. It always strikes me, we're a small village with a smaller staff. So some of the bigger things like land acquisition, unit acquisition, I'm a little worried about that, because we have to administer it, we have to oversight it. If we farmed it over, we'd be cutting directly into the $2 million that we have. I mean, it's certainly not to say that we can't do it. I just always try to think of what the easiest route is forward. And it seems to me that, vouchers are really kind of the place to start here. But I mean, again, I'm coming at this kind of new, but it always, I do worry about kind of as we talk about these bigger kind of bites at the apple, and the oversight and the kind of costs that the village would have to take on to farm that out.
Well, and I agree, and I think that we have, again, as we said, this reservoir of half of our units are privately owned apartments. So we have a pool of landlords, and I don't think we should assume that they don't want to participate. That we need to reach out to them in a good way and talk about all the advantages. And, we could very quickly solve a problem.
Every single one of them wants to participate.
Right.
At a certain number.
Right.
Well,
So it's a matter of figuring out what
Right.
price do we put on that?
How do we know that they're not increasing their rents with being topped off? So my two questions that,
I'm just trying to understand topped off one more time. topped off.
covering the gap between the voucher and what the rent is.
Okay.
So the,
A
Yeah.
rent,
Filling the
a
gap.
rent 3 miles west of here is gonna be far different from here. So the subsidy would cover that rent there, but it wouldn't cover it here. Although it's seeming like getting closer for the time being.
I think
rents
there's a
are about to
little bit
go
of
through.
concern with that, but,
You mean the privacy issue of do they have to open up their books? Is that
no, just whether or not are they
It's called
truly,
rent.
I think this is what you're saying, are they charging market rent or are they charging above market rent because now they can?
correct. So
Or
let's
paying
say that they are at $1,500 for that flat, right? And then
And
they
if
hear
the
about this
village is-
program and then they say, oh, I'm gonna increase it to 1,700.
And then get $2,000.
Right, like it just, so that was a first question. And the second is, do Corey and T, do you guys know of programs that have like a proposal or program requirements for landlords to be in a program like this, where we would contract with them or top them off.
So I guess it gets back to the transparency thing.
Do you know program requirements for that?
That you could adapt and use as your own program requirements or use a certification from another agency to be able to do that.
Yep.
I mean, there are, yeah, I mean, there's typically the way that the accountability is typically handled through audit. And so that's the way that you typically would do it, because even if you do have an upfront certification, there needs to be that back end audit that they follow through with it. And so I mean, of course, anybody will do anything at any number. And so I agree with that sentiment. But I actually think that your biggest problem, I am completely speculating, you should investigate as a root cause. Is it the dollars that are preventing landlords from going in the program or not? And Corey listed about 10 other reasons why it might not be the dollars. And I think that those are your bigger issues, is that they don't want to deal with the administrative headache. And why would they when they can do a market rent?
Dollars is difficult.
Yeah, and so I think you're onto something about, can you find a partner that can be a responsible landlord? I mean, I think it definitely should fall in your sort of top, 5 strategies to consider.
And so what happens if we tried the voucher thing, we try to work with landlords, blah, 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 and in 3 years, we're like, this didn't work out so well. And we spent a 1.5 million. And we have to just be prepared for.
My thoughts on that are
Okay.
as follows. I think that we should throw a broad net. I think we can't do anything about requirements for new construction, but we should recommend to the board that all units going forward have 20% affordable housing. So no one can sneak one in and not have that. We can't do that.
This LIHTC.
What if they don't want to?
The board doesn't want to?
No, what if the developer doesn't?
I'm
Then
saying,
they can't come here.
then they can't come here. The board.
We can't, yeah, but we can't.
The city.
Your state preempted that strategy.
What about that individual code thing that we were talking about amending? Like the president was talking about, was talking about like individual codes that would prevent them from doing like sun seekers or whatever. No?
Inclusionary zoning is prohibited in
Inclusionary-
Wisconsin, so we can't require new developments to have affordable housing included.
Oh.
with it.
Because we
But you
do.
could if you own, you could if you
We
own
could
the
if
land.
Right.
we're a partner.
If we own the land, right, so ownership of land
Or
is
if we
one of the other
provide
options.
TIF funds or something.
Okay.
If we're part of the deal in some
I thought
level.
there was
we
a
can
back
require-
and run around that we were working on. Okay. Well, anyway, I think we should put this strategy out there and see who bites at it. And if it only fills 3 duplexes, well, that's 3 more. It's part of a bigger strategy.
I know we're running into some time
Yeah.
constraints here a little bit. So I think this was all really interesting. I really enjoyed the discussion
Yes,
today.
it's
This
great.
was good.
Good.
Do people feel comfortable? I mean, I'm sensing a little bit of consensus, here, that we kind of feel, correct me if I'm wrong, we would all like to do something sooner rather than later. We have the money, the voucher. I'm thinking maybe we make a recommendation to the board down this path. You actually have a staff put recommendation here.
The voucher concepts were kind of, were outlined a bit and with some different options included within
So
that.
it'd be the second one, creating affordable units with existing rental units, specify strategy, which would be, or creation of the voucher program, the second
Right.
option on option 2.
What I've been hearing is that I think we have some general, not full, some general consensus down that strategy path. Does that sound fair?
I mean, I think the exploring the creation of a voucher program, in my opinion, is sort of where we need to go and to explore how that would work with our current landlords and the receptiveness, and like what Mike was saying, to the opportunity with the current landlords.
Yeah.
Sort of, that's my thoughts of the best way we can use our money and be effective in our community.
Okay. Does anyone else have any discussion? on-
I'll
on
second that.
I think it's easy. And I think it's low hanging. I'd be interested in hearing what Could you give us your unbiased opinion on what if you were in our shoes you would do? Because you are kind of the expert at the table here.
I would use the analogy of corporations. When corporations are doing really well, the first thing they do is buy back their stock, right? And in your analogy, you're doing so well and your stock equivalent is land. I mean, I think that if you're willing to grow, right, and which is a big question here, I think that you should seriously consider land acquisition now or property acquisition. Now, you're doing part of that, right? Like you're buying, if you're doing vouchers, that's one step of that. You're buying a property for affordable housing. So I think that's why that is very attractive. But I would look at what is the most valuable resource that you have in your community, and you want as much of that under your control as possible.
I know what it is.
That's what, well, so a number of the developers who we've spoken to on WIDA and other people, they're like the strongest, they, in their words to us, you know, the strongest thing you could do is go and buy land and control the development that you do on it. Whether that's something that people have the wherewithal for.
Yeah, and I mean, Corey's suggestion is so good because it's a strategy that doesn't involve your TID funds. I mean, explore the heck out of that, right? Like do that independently because you have another resource. Yeah, she's saying that you can use City of Milwaukee vouchers to do this, which is their money. I mean, you have to explore that
So
heavily.
we wouldn't use TID money to do what we just proposed?
Just to top up.
You,
Use a couple hundred
right.
dollars.
So I, explore that opportunity, fully, and then you might have to put some of your resources in there. And then if you consider about the best use of your resources, I think if I'm in your shoes, I look at property acquisition is what I would
Okay,
look
I
at.
don't want to.
The
I just threw this
problem
out
is
there.
that, are you taking property off the tax roll?
I mean, if you do a tax credit development, the answer is no. All low income housing tax credit developments are on the tax roll.
Okay, it's still
Okay.
private.
I also think that, just like Kathy or somebody said, we have 2 developments going up right now that I think we really need to work with to see, especially if one of them said they're still interested in the voucher or some way to bring in some of their tenants. That's a golden opportunity. We should not.
I've been up for putting out.
We have the money available. I think if they're at all receptive, we should try to do that.
Right,
I
right.
would like to see that along with
Yeah.
pursuing, basically, I think what we're all saying is existing and or already planned housing is where we should focus our efforts right now.
I would also like to just put out there, I think people want integration in the community and we don't want one building of affordable housing.
Yeah.
No one does.
I mean,
It's worked really well at the White Horse. It is so integrated. It's
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how you feel part of the community instead of you're separate in this.
and that's the
separate
one
block.
downside to River Park.
Yes.
And it's a huge negative, I think.
Right.
Can I clarify, did you make a motion?
Sort of.
Because I heard a second.
Well, it's not
Not
officially.
officially.
I
That's what-
I can make it a motion.
But I think we're at a point where we could do that.
Should I make the motion?
Yeah.
Okay, I move to explore the creation of a voucher program, creating affordable units within existing rental units.
And is there an and with also?
Existing and currently planned. How about that? Rental units.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
But Wimmer has just slammed the door. I'm sorry.
Yes, you're
Yeah,
correct.
and they can. That's right.
You know, why waste any more time?
Right, and then we can go and, you know,
right.
Wimmer was
Oh,
very
Wimmer,
clear at the end, because
yeah.
we do, just so you know, anyone who we talk to about it, we always talk about affordable housing. And with their company right at the beginning, they said, no, that's not something that our business wants to explore.
Yeah.
End of story. Now with Three Leaf, you know, we've said, and they're continuing to talk about it and, you know, where they're going or what they want to do. So we can continue to, you know, listen to them in terms of how that might look.
And I do believe if these 2 developments go well,
I'm sorry, say it again.
if these 2 developments that are currently on the table, they go well, whether they have affordable or not in them, things are finally loosening up in the world. This is going to bring more development requests to the village. We will have more opportunities to have these discussions.
Well, and I think too, being able to say to Wimmer, is that the one that's might
Like
be
what?
considered.
No, three.
No,
leaves.
three leaves.
That we would have a way of getting you these tenants so that they don't feel like they have to go out and find eligible tenants, but that we work with the.
Just having a plan in place.
Right, the
that
housing
we
authority
Can
that
actually
will,
say,
you
here
know.
is, this is what we're doing, rather
So-
than, yeah, we're thinking
So
about doing
Rebecca or
this
Bart
stuff.
could
and
give
it
them
might happen
Corey's
in a
phone
year.
number, right? And that this is how that would work, right? So it wouldn't be our staff, that it would be funneled through Corey, right?
You're looking.
Maybe it's funneled through the housing authority, yeah.
And I like sort of joke, but I mean, truthfully, I mean, Pat Connington owns Three Leaf, like, is there a way that we could, you know, kind of make that a political strategy and a PR strategy that he's like doing, you know, providing good for
Yeah.
Milwaukee?
Are you tipping that project?
No.
No,
I know you're short on time. You should put just as a note, you can TIF projects that don't need it to pay for adjacent or other projects for affordable housing. And so you're talking about using this existing 2 million that you have, which is going to be gone. But if you would look at a TID policy of if somebody brings you a market rate development, you will TIF it if it includes 20% affordable housing.
Great.
Isn't that in that?
There's lots of things I think that we can start.
I was gonna suggest, I know this is out there, but it wouldn't cost anything to put it basically an RFP, a request for proposals from developers, so that they all know that we are willing to partner with people with other foundations. We have money available. This is our goal, and see what they propose to us instead of us at this table trying to imagine what a developer might come up with.
Agreed, and if we can get the board to adopt an official strategy so that we aren't talking theoreticals anymore, we have something that we can sit down and talk to people about that's gonna go.
So how
Much,
would that
much
be different than the TID policy we already have? We have a TID policy. So how, what do you?
Well, I'm not,
what do
whether
you
it's a
want
TID
that's
policy
different?
or not, I'm just saying, if it's a voucher program, whatever strategy we are going to adopt from on the board level, can we get something adopted? So that developers, everyone knows what we're doing.
I don't
Right
know
now,
if the
everything's just
developers who are in
theoretical.
this space even consider Shorewood at this point. I'm sure they know that we did this with the money, but maybe not. Maybe they don't think that this is fertile ground for them to like, and maybe if they hear from us and we say, hey, this is our goal, we're aggressive about it. Give us a proposal. What can you do? How can you bring these units to us?
Are you talking about a TID policy or
Sorry,
just
No,
a
a
develop-
developer,
doesn't
like
have-
someone to take some of some property and build something.
We don't have that
Something
voucher
in there
component.
about affordable housing in our TID policy.
We do,
Well, just so it cannot be used for market rate.
correct. And then we call out, you know, the different parameters, but we do. I mean, it speaks a lot to affordable housing.
So I guess I'm
Or
more
housing.
confused as to, so.
Let's
like,
not get too, like, we don't have enough time to get into
Yeah,
that
so what
discussion.
would Bart, I'd be curious, what do you think, why has no one come to us and said, wow, I want to be part of the affordable housing with your village?
You don't have land.
We have.
We don't have the
You
land.
don't have land. The land, you're.
What if we
promised
were to
land is-
go to them and
But
say
we
that
do
we
have
would
land, we have land
assemble?
sitting vacant on Oakland Avenue right now, and we remediated it, and so why is no one saying, wow, I really
Yeah,
want
but
to
it's
build?
very
Well, we don't have a
small.
program for them to partner with, so that
Yeah.
if we had something for them to partner with, I could see them asking, but I don't know that it's realistic to have someone propose a partnership with us if we don't know what we're partnering with, right? So to this point, we have had conversations with Three Leaf and we continue to say, tell us what you need and we will see if it's part of possibilities, but if we had programs, and we have had developers say, you know, they would use LIHTC if we had a site available for them. Right now, the only sites that we really have are the parking lots, you know, that the village owns, but if.
So are those bigger than that, spot south of the Black Bear Boutique? Our parking lots are bigger than.
Some are, I mean, there's some that are smaller, but they're various sizes.
And the other thing is, you know, Milwaukee is putting housing above their libraries.
All right, well, since we're going there, just to hang it out there to put in your heads to think about, I looked all over the village for any available land. I tried to push the county to give us some of there. That wasn't happening. I think the
Nice
opportunity,
try though.
and I
I
don't want
know.
to get this out in public. I think the opportunity is the PNC Bank you can get for $1 million. The Einstein Bagels is sitting there, was Caribou for a second, then it wasn't. And Marion Street does not need to be there. I use that as my main thoroughfare and I think it close there. You put those two sites together and close Marion there. That's a big enough piece to do a real development on. That, I think we could, and it's on Old Street. Yep, and it's heavily underutilized, it's mostly parking right now. And you could put the commercial right back in there, or you could put accessible units on the first floor, residential. And we could get Tigre interested in this process.
One thing I know is once developers are very smart people, and I don't consider myself one of them.
I was gonna say.
But if we give people, developers, the general public, a sense that we are not all over the map and we know what we want and we have a somewhat cohesive strategy, good things will come. Our problem right now is we do not have that. That's my personal opinion is if you ask anyone who knows anything about Shorewood, their first response is probably, those guys don't know what they're doing. We're gonna go back there in a couple of years once they figure out what they want.
Well, I think the problem
So-
we have is our history. We have Metro Market.
Correct. So I think to that point, because when we do talk with people, well, what do you want? Right?
That's why I
And
think
they
we
just
need
say,
to
"That's
make
what I don't
this,
want."
we need to make this direction, let's pick a direction and see what happens. Like, we've been talking about this for a year and a half, or more. And I feel like we have some pretty good consensus here that this is a general direction. There's some offshoots we could go down and we could, if this works really well, then we look at other things. But let's do something now so that we can start making some progress with actually solidifying a direction that we want to go.
I think it has to be done in the context of our updated commercial zoning, or it will never fly.
I don't think anybody we talked about goes against that.
Well, it's not done yet.
No, but it's basically done. Yeah. Well, we have a motion.
I say, can we still add that motion if she's left? I don't know.
I think she's on.
Did she
I
rejoin?
think Wesley
That's
rejoined.
Wesley.
Wesley's still on.
Or someone else
We
willing to
do
make the
still have
motion,
a
make this-
quorum, so we can take action. I guess before we do that, for takeaways and follow-up, with regards to 3-Leaf, it's for us to re-engage with 3-Leaf regarding affordable housing. They can reflect on this meeting, and after that's posted, and then Corey, I'd be following up with you, and we'd be talking a lot more about vouchers. And of course, you as well.
Anytime you need me.
And I just want to really thank the two of you for being so present, because one of the things that I think has been challenging for us is that not a lot of people are having these discussions in this way or looking to create partnerships to be creative. And I really appreciated how you put that into your presentation, which is things when we work together, there'll be much greater things that could ever happen versus going alone. So just grateful.
I lost my train of thought. Besides some people feeling very strongly about a development that they feel doesn't fit in the community, the other problem we have here, I think, is a TIG fatigue. We had one that was open since 1995, and I think a lot of people, for some people, that's a bridge to cross. Not everybody, but for some people, that's, with the property tax rates that we pay, some people, it's a problem. That's it. Do you want me to reread it?
Yeah.
I recommend the village board consider creating affordable units within existing rental units through expiration of the creation of a voucher program.
And the new to be constructed units too.
Existing and
Existing and current.
Currently
Currently
proposed.
proposed.
All right.
Still second.
Okay.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Right. Okay. Joe?
Aye.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I
didn't hear you say.
Oh, sorry.
And Wesley, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I was trying to get off mute for like the last
I'm
30
sorry,
seconds.
Wes. I'm sorry.
So did the vote? I had to hold my phone away for a second. Did we just vote?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
I agree. I'm in agreement.
Thank you.
So with that, these recommendations, then we'll go forth to the board for review on September 6th, because we want to be in alignment, right, each step we take. So, and I'm out of the office next week, so there will not be, that's not enough time for me to circle back and then see how they're gonna respond. So I'll be in contact with you regarding the next meeting date
Okay.
in September. And thank you. You've been a fun group. This has been a fun morning.
Good democracy at work. It's
Right?
great.
Can we,
Oh,
we need a motion to adjourn?
I motion we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Sure.